Water is on our minds, and how to deal with the drought is making everyday headlines, TV, the papers, all over. And I want to say how much the League appreciates your coming down, Lester, making the effort to be with us. Mr. Snow has a distinguished record of innovation, collaboration, and results while working on complex natural resource management matters. He is an executive director of the California Water Foundation. Most recently, he served as Secretary of California's Natural Resource Agency, where he oversaw 25 departments, commissions, boards, and conservancies. Previously, Mr. Snow was director of the California Department of Water Resources with responsibility to protect, conserve, and manage California's water resources. This includes the operation of California's State Water Project, the largest state-run, multi-purpose water and power system in the United States. Mr. Snow has also held management positions in the San Diego County Water District, as well as the Arizona Water Resources Department. He holds a master's degree in water resource administration from the University of Arizona and a bachelor's degree in earth sciences from Pennsylvania State University. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Lester Snow.
Oh, thank you, Peter, for a kind introduction. If every time I talk about drought it rains, I guess I should just kind of keep on talking. It reminds me when I was a general manager of San Diego County Water Authority. I don't know how many of you remember there was a 86 to 92 drought, and it got really bad in 91. And in San Diego, we were looking at 50% water supply. So we had a series of public hearings all around the county and in our offices. We were on the verge of banning outdoor water use. I mean, absolutely banning it, along with a lot of other things. And in, I think, late February, maybe it was the first week of March in 91, we held a very large hearing. We expected 400 or 500 people to attend. So we were in the Scottish Rite Center in Mission Valley, if you've ever been there. And a lot of people testifying. It was such a downpour that day. The roof was leaking. The maintenance people at the Scottish Rite Center sent out trash buckets to collect the water. People leaving the hearing on drought, cars stalled in the parking lot because the water was so deep. And if you remember that series of storms ended up being called the March Miracle. And it actually bailed the state out. And that may be a first lesson or an indicator. We've got a problem here in California when you have to literally pray for rain and get a very unusual storm track to bail you out. And that was in 91. And it's kind of an indication that things have changed and we do not have the supply reliability we once had. At the same time, we have a dramatically increased population. And we have an agriculture that has a demand for water that is more firm than it used to be, and I'll explain that a little bit more in a moment. So I think I'm going to wander over there to go through a few slides, if I can figure out how to keep that thing from spinning around on the screen. But this could turn out to be a technical test of some sort. I think, there we go. Now I just need to get rid of that. Unless whoever's computer this is wants me to order them some software. I'd be glad to do that. I don't know how to get rid of that. Oh, there it is. So to get out of everybody's way, is that a good idea? So let me run through just I want to do a little bit of background to kind of set the stage. of our rich history on water and where we are and where we need to go. This may seem odd, but to talk about our situation, I usually go back to something that's called the Swamp and Overflow Act, and I'm sure everybody's quite familiar with what the Swamp and Overflow Act was. But in the mid-1800s, Congress passed a series of laws that affected different places in the United States, and they were called Swamp and Overflow Acts. And the idea was that the federal government had so much land all across the West that they would give up the swampland and flood-prone land to states that had a system to reclaim that land. And when that happened in California, there was just kind of this massive effort, kind of depicted on the left-hand side with these historic dredges actually building crude levees to drain swamps. And then one of the next things that's happened with the hydraulic mining on the right-hand side of the screen was the first time it brought farmers and riverboat captains together to say, hey, you've got to stop doing that. It's ruining our rivers and causing floods. So those two acts alone of draining the swamps and dealing with flood destroyed over 90% of the wetlands in the state of California and about 95% of the riparian habitat by the way that we did that. So it wasn't evil intended. Draining swamps was a good thing. Malaria was a bad disease and wanted to reclaim this land. Then we came in and built a massive water system. So it's no surprise we have environmental consequences or environmental problems in our system by the way that we have developed the state. The other issue that's important to understand how we have developed as a state with our water supply is where the water occurs, this darker blue area, and how in the areas where we've tended to develop, there's not much water at all. And so you get 90% of the water supply in 40% of the state. And then the other problem is the water runoff in that system is very variable, highly erratic. And so the water doesn't occur where we want it, and it doesn't occur with great regularity. So other than that, it's an ideal system. So the way that we evolved is developing these massive systems. This one over 100 years ago, Los Angeles Aqueduct, very, very famous. Movies made about it. Chinatown, wonderful movie. Then we had Hetch Hetchy Aqueduct that supplied the city of San Francisco. McCollum Aqueduct, actually those lines are reversed, but the next one to come along was the McCollum Aqueduct for the East Bay area, all bringing water out of the mountains. Then next installment for Southern California was the Colorado River Aqueduct to move water off the river and bring it to the South Coastal Plain. Then the massive federal project, the Central Valley Project. Many dams and many canals that developed, again, water in the Sierra or the Northern Cascade, or in the Cascades, and then moved it largely to agriculture, big dams and big pumping plants. And then finally, in the Pat Brown administration, developing the State Water Project. Again, developing water in Northern California, flowing through the Delta, and then pumped through the San Joaquin Valley. That water ends up all the way down next to the Mexican border in San Diego County. Now, that incredible system, envy of many places in the world, fueled the economy. Every one of those projects had unintended consequences, largely environmental, but other kind of social consequences, but major environmental consequences. And none of them are capable of delivering the water they once delivered. And there are two primary reasons for that. One is climate change. The way water occurs has changed significantly. And the other is, as a society, we decided to protect the environment. All these damages had occurred, and we decided to restore and try to protect the environment. So as a result of both of those things, none of those projects can deliver what they once did. So the challenges that we usually talk about with our water system is increasing population, aging infrastructure. You saw the dates of those major projects, and they're old. I mean, over 100 years for some of them. And I didn't even catch all of the ag projects that have been developed over the years. Groundwater overdraft. We have used our groundwater in the state like a savings account, but everybody has access to it and nobody has to put deposits into it. And nobody ever balances the account. Again, a wonderful system. We call it deficit spending of water, basically. Degraded ecosystems, increasing conflict. I think we're starting to turn out more water attorneys than Hollywood attorneys these days, if that's believable. And then significantly increasing uncertainty due to climate change. Our water is simply occurring in a different pattern than it once did. And this is just an illustration of one of the phenomenons that climatologists have been forecasting for a long time, that we're losing snowpack. And you can see these are 3 consecutive years and at the same time each year. And I think this is probably 2012, 13, and 14. And I've got another series that actually illustrates that a little better. So that's my pep talk of how well we're doing on water management in California. So that's the problem. I mean, that's the nature of the issue that we're dealing with. What we used to rely on as very reliable water supplies is not reliable, and we have not adequately invested. Typically, what we talk about moving forward is something kind of called a diversification or a portfolio approach. And it's integrated water management is a term we use. It means managing our groundwater supplies more efficiently, maximizing our urban water use efficiency. We've become sloppy in the way that we use water because it was so reliable for so long. Stormwater capture, and I'll mention this again in a moment. It will rain, and that rain will run off our streets, and chances are run into a channel, flow into the ocean, and pollute the beaches. That's a water resource, and so that's water that can be captured and used. It can be captured on people's homes by catching it off your roof in rain barrels and using it. It can be developed and captured and put into recharge basins to recharge our groundwater supplies. So it's seen as a liability, a pollution of our beaches. It's actually an asset that we can develop. Recycled water, big drought going on right now, and this year we will discharge 1.5 million acre feet of water, that's enough for 3 million homes, into the ocean. And that's water that in other countries they reclaim and recycle that water. Change the way that we operate the system to maximize fish benefits, flood benefits, and water supplies. We don't do an efficient job, again, because we've gotten so used to having reliable supplies we don't have to think about. And flood management kind of refers to what I mentioned a moment ago in terms of the historic perspective. We need to restore some of that habitat so that every time you read a letter to the editor, somebody isn't complaining, protecting the Delta smelt is killing my farm, or the almond growers are killing the Delta smelt. We need to do something methodical to start protecting the ecosystem, and we can do that in kind of restoring some of the original floodplain and the habitat that goes with it. So this is the system that we like to talk about, how things are actually interconnected. One city isn't isolated from another city. The irrigation district isn't separate from maintaining wetlands. It kind of illustrates that if you're not careful in the way that you pump groundwater, you can actually dewater a stream. And that's happened in many places in California.
The parking across the street is only in the south parking lot. There's 2 people in the north parking lot, and I understand they're ready to be ticketed. So.
You're welcome. That's a public service announcement. So, and we have this where you pump so much water that you draw the groundwater down and it starts depleting the stream. This also illustrates what we did in our flood management. I mean, these are usually what's called rip-wrapped levees. It means they're just lined with stone. There's no habitat. compared to what can exist when you have a wider floodplain and habitat. A city may have the stormwater that I talked about. They just let it run off, and it can pollute a stream or the coast or what have you, as opposed to reclaiming it and making it part of the water supply. Everybody's dependent on the health of the watershed. So the point is, we have a broad natural system that provides us water. And when we start thinking in kind of isolated, like one irrigation district, I want to take care of my 2 wells and I don't care what's going on anywhere else. Actually, you do care. You just may not be aware how it affects you. I like this. I can whack people's knuckles if they ask bad questions. So, I don't know what that means. Um, 2014 was a historic drought, so I'll jump to 2015 in a minute. It resulted in the governor laying out a water action plan. Until early last year, the only thing the governor talked about with respect to water was building tunnels in the Delta. And I think about February of last year, he put out a very comprehensive, what we call a diversified portfolio approach: wastewater recycling, conservation, stormwater, groundwater management, all of those things. And also last year, because of the attention on the drought, we were able to pass the first ever statewide groundwater management act for California. And as I'm sure you're aware, passage of Prop 1, the water bond, by a wide margin. So just a drought update. The very dark and then the lighter red are, the lighter red is extreme drought, and the very dark wine color is exceptional drought. And so you have 2/3 of the state that is extreme drought or worse, and we expect this to just continue to grow through the summer. And it's been this way for some time. We're in a 4th year of a drought. This does not show up terribly well, but this is a reservoir conditions as of, looks like 2 weeks ago. And you can see some of the, let me explain this a little better. These bars would be the capacity of the reservoir. The line would be where you would expect it to be, or on average would be on, in this case, April 20th, and then the blue is where the water actually is. And so one of the things that's of particular note are some of these east side reservoirs that supply agriculture. Some of them are, 9% of supply, 20%, are the lowest they've ever been since they were constructed. And so these are the areas where you expect to have very serious impacts on agriculture and very serious groundwater overpumping this year. In general, the state is way behind on its water supply, and because of the lack of snowpack, sometimes we count on late April, May, early June snowmelt refilling the reservoirs. But since our snowpack was 5% of normal, that's not going to happen. And this is the drought forecast. It's updated monthly. It's a federal government in coordination with a number of universities. And so the chocolate color is areas that they expect the drought to persist or get worse. And so you can see roughly 98% of California is expected to stay bad or actually get worse. So this is a kind of another thing to bring home the difference, the severity of the drought as well as the snowpack. So Half Dome in Yosemite in 2011, all these are the same date, March 19th, 2012, 13, 14, and it's similar, and this year. So you can see how significant it is, because that's our snowpack is a huge reservoir, and our system was designed on having that and then having it melt slowly, April, May, middle of June, and it's refilling the reservoirs as you drain them down. So when we look at 2015, what are the issues and what kind of opportunities do they create? The drought's actually going to be worse this year, far worse in terms of its impact than it was last year. It means looking, SGMA stands for the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which they're starting to implement. It means getting our arms around this savings account that we have been abusing. And we've been abusing it in the sense of just deficit spending. We have built an economy on having about almost 10% of our water supply being taken out of storage and never replaced. And so obviously you can't keep doing that. Focus on implementing the $7 billion in the bond, the BDCP, Bay Delta Conservation Plan. The governor's been talking lately, this is recently as yesterday, about the Delta and the need to fix that. That's going to occupy a lot of attention this year. And then with the change in Congress, there's some expectation we're going to see bills wanting to roll back the Endangered Species Act as a way to cope with some of these issues. I have great difficulty with that. I mean, some of the, you've probably seen letters to the editor of LA Times, I've dealt with a lot of LA Times reporters, where someone will say, we just need to ban almonds and everything will be okay. Probably not. Or, we just need to let the Delta smelt die and be done with it and everything will be fine. Well, those issues are symptoms of a problem. They're not the problem. And if we look for those simple solutions, we're never going to get to the comprehensive investment in fixing the problems that we have. So I'll hit the groundwater just a little bit. In an average year, it's 40% of California's water supply. In a typical dry year, it's 60%. This year, it'll probably be between 70 and 75% of the water supply for California. And it's a critical part of our management strategy because you can put wet water in the wintertime. When you have a drought, you pull a little more out. So it can be like a bank account as long as you balance your books every once in a while. Decades of increasing use, hardening of demand that has resulted in much more overdraft. The overdraft in the valley has resulted in the Earth's surface sinking 50 feet in some places, cracking roads and canals, damaging wells. It's dried up some rivers, as I mentioned. Does anybody want to play this game? I just want to say, if something embarrassing pops up, I just want you to know this is not my computer. I'm not saying, you know, just... So a lot of problems with, just like overdrafting your own financial account, nothing good comes of that. Nothing but problems, and that's what we've been doing. This is a little dense, but I kind of want to show the interconnectedness here a little bit. So this is Santa Clara Valley, San Jose, and you know, back after the turn of the century, it started being settled for ag land, and the groundwater in that region was very high. And then they started pumping for ag use, and it started getting really dropping, and it alarmed people, and they built some local reservoirs and captured some of the stream flow. There's not a lot in that part of the state, but some, and you can see the groundwater rebounded. Further agricultural development, starting to be urbanization, and again, a plummeting of the groundwater levels. And then they hooked up to the State Water Project, again, a rebound. Starting a decline again, they hooked up to the Federal Water Project, and now they manage quite sustainably in Santa Clara. The problem that doesn't show up real well is that this overdraft resulted in subsidence. And so San Jose is roughly 13 feet lower than it was before this groundwater pumping happened, and puts them at about a few feet below sea level. So the way we manage water has increased the flood risk of Silicon Valley, or a large portion of Silicon Valley. And that's the interconnectedness that we try to get water managers to kind of think through, because it has a dramatic and potentially very expensive consequences to it. spend time on that. The bond takes a portfolio approach to things. There's funding. I mean, I think generally you can find funding for any aspect of water management that you can think of. Even in terms of conservation, it would support turf replacement programs and other things like that that are already going on in different regions. Groundwater storage projects, wastewater recycling, stormwater capture, groundwater management, all of that is in the bond, and there's a lot of pressure on the state to get that money out now that the drought is continuing. I'm going to mention the Delta just a little bit because it's been in the news so much. And this is the Sacramento River. And if you think of that, the earlier map of the system development, the state and federal project, all the water for those projects come from up in the Sacramento Valley. And so that water flows in the Sacramento River and comes down through here to these very large pumping plants. And so that's how it gets to agriculture and then all the way to Southern California. So this is one of the areas that was reclaimed under the Swamp and Overflow Act. So many of these islands are below sea level and non-engineered levees. And so one of the issues that has driven consideration of how do you move the water more effectively from the Sacramento River to the pumps has been about how do you protect against this uncertainty of failure of the levees, how do you protect the ecosystem that's here instead of pumping fish into the pumps. So the plan for a long time, first time that Governor Brown was in office, was the peripheral canal of moving roughly from, well, up in this area and build a canal all the way around to these facilities. Now it's the same concept, but divert water up in this area and build huge tunnels underneath to bring the water there to avoid this risk area and to protect some of the delta smelt habitat. And then there are strategies for replacing a lot of habitat in and around the delta. There are people that have been on opposite sides of this issue for their entire lives. I mean, a decade type of thing. There's nothing you could analyze or do that will change their opinion about how important it is to build it and how awful it is to build it. And that's, I think Governor Brown said something yesterday that maybe he'll have to come back again in another 40 years and run to finish the project. So I want to go back and conclude with this slide and hopefully get into some questions with you. But we're all in this together. That's our message as we talk about water. You can't go to agriculture and say, don't grow these 3 crops. What you can say is grow with the sustainable water that you have. You know, don't mine the water. Grow with the water you have and make the cropping choices that you want to. You can't go and say, well, let's just pave over the environment. The environment's using too much water. And we need to have all that water. And let's stop letting the rivers run to the ocean. Well, I don't think that's the California we want in our future. So we all have opportunities. You live in this city and you have a big lawn out front that no kids play in, change it to drought-tolerant landscaping. You've contributed to this setting. We have wastewater that gets discharged to the ocean. Why are we doing that? Why don't we reclaim that like so many other cities do all around the world? We have a drying watershed that's not healthy. And we need to do things to restore the watershed that will give us a better water supply in our reservoirs. So there's a very comprehensive way to approach this. It's not as sexy as, I don't know how many of you saw William Shatner's proposal. Did you read about that? Well, it was, what do they call it, crowdsourcing? So he was going to crowdsource $30 billion to build a pipeline from, like Alaska, or at least from Seattle or someplace like that, and bring in a new supply in. Well, the first $30 billion wouldn't even remotely cover the costs of a supply line like that. But also, just think about, we've been fighting for 4 decades over building tunnels for 40 miles. And we can't come to grips with that, but we're going to convince 2 other states to build massive pipelines so we can take their water to support our wasteful ways. I don't see it happening. And then there's also been suggestions of building to the Great Lakes. Again, why do they want to give us their water? And then you cross all kinds of states that have water problems also. So there's just major issues with that. I got a letter just this week from somebody who's manufacturing huge bags that they would tow behind tugs. And they would get fresh water up in the Northwest somewhere, and they would bring them into San Francisco, these huge water baggies, basically. So a lot of ideas, but there's so much that we can do in the system that we have if we invest and sustain that investment to regain the reliability that we once had. So that's my thought for the day. I'd be glad to entertain questions that you guys might have. Yeah. Carlsbad. Yeah, if you didn't hear, it's how to... Mm-hmm. Got it.
And also we will pick up cars.
The question was, where does desal fit into this? And I think currently desal is still what I would call a boutique application. It has a very, what we refer to as an energy footprint, a very high carbon footprint, because it takes a lot of energy to remove the salt from water. So it's expensive just to make the clean water. And then when you think about it, you have clean water or drinkable water at sea level, and you have to pump it up into your system. So it just ends up being expensive. And then there's also concern about impact on marine life that we've seen. But Carlsbad is proceeding with what will be the largest desal facility on the West Coast. They expect that to be producing water for San Diego County Water Authority later this year, 50 million gallons a day production. Desal is generally seen as the only solution to the Monterey Bay Peninsula's water problems. They're water short. They've been over-pumping water out of the Carmel River. They're under an order to cease and desist that overuse of that water. And so you'll probably see a desal plant eventually happen there. But environmental and energy issues, I think, hold it back. What I would add, though, some people may be aware of something the Australians called the Big Dry, the millennial drought that they had, went on for 10 years. And every major city in Australia constructed a desal facility. 4 of the 5 never went into full operation because it rained and filled the reservoirs. Now, the political leaders don't regret that because they say they're ready for the next drought that they might have. So it's a controversial issue. There's some places where you have to go to desal. What's happening actually in Southern California region is something called brackish water desal. So that's groundwater that's a little bit salty. So it's not as salty as ocean water, and that's being used more and more. I read that crops are often watered with wastewater from the oil business. How dangerous is this? There's something called production water. I mean, this isn't directly related to fracking. This is something that's been around for a while. But they will bring up water as part of getting kind of the last oil out. And it's used a little bit in Kern County. I don't think it's used very widely, and I've never heard of health consequences of that, but I don't know. So I probably should say I don't know the precise answer to the question. Fracking's a little bit different. I think the oil industry's done themselves a great disservice by saying that what they put down the well is proprietary information. We can't tell you what it is. That's just hard to deal with. I think there was a court case just recently settled, I think it was Pennsylvania, Ohio perhaps, where they revealed in the court case what the chemicals were and what the settlement was for contamination. So there's a lot changing as we speak on that issue. What about seeding clouds? I'm not sure I can read the second part, but so I'll answer the part that I can read. So actually, cloud seeding has been used by Pacific Gas and Electric for about 50 or 60 years in the Sierra, and they feel that it's been effective in increasing their snowpack 5 or 6%. So if you're a power producer, that's not insignificant. The problem is it's usually a percent, let's say 5% increase on the snowstorm that's coming in. If you don't have snowstorms coming in, then your cloud seeding doesn't get you very much. Yeah, part of the criticism of the water bond was that its implementation would be too late. Too late for this drought. There's no question about that. And my thoughts on that is that when your house is on fire, you don't have time to fireproof your home, right? So you think about what are you going to do to fireproof your home when this fire's out? That's really what these investments are about. I mean, we all hope the drought's over next year. That this bond will have very little effect in that time period. So what we need to do is remember the drought and then sustain the investments we need so the next time this happens, and it will, we are more prepared. We don't have to tell people to let their lawn go dry because they've already gone to xeriscape or drought-tolerant landscaping. Or instead of dumping 1.5 million acre-feet of wastewater in the ocean, we're reclaiming that, and it's making our parks and golf courses green. So it's really preparing for the next. There's a term that gets used that the political half-life of a drought, where you have energy to do something, lasts until the reservoir is filled. And then people forget it. It's a distant memory. The half-life of floods a little bit longer because you can see the houses that were lost or something like that. With a drought, man, as soon as the reservoirs are full, in fact, sometimes a drought ends with some floods, and you turn your attention right away to flood. What is the impact of the legal decision on tiered water rates? And if you're not familiar with that, there was a court case announced last week for San Juan Capistrano where they had tiered rates, and some local homeowners sued them that they didn't comply with Proposition 218, which requires a fairly rigorous connection between your rate and the service that somebody's providing. And so they argued that upper tier wasn't directly related to a service, and the court agreed. And I think this could have a devastating effect, because I think one of the best ways to send a conservation message is an economic message, that the more you use, the more you pay per unit, because those last incremental costs of water to hit that peak demand are very expensive. And I think we need to do a better job of sending economic messages. In most of California, the water bill is still cheaper than your phone bill or certainly your cable bill. Somebody sent me a quote from 1922 from William Mulholland making the same complaint, that what you pay in LA, what he was saying, for your water is cheaper than my shoe shine. Say that real fast, and then Sally seashells by the seashore, and your phone bill. Well, that hasn't changed. It's this incredible life-giving good that is among the cheapest things that we pay on a monthly basis. We've got lots of them here. Can households help by changing over their toilets to low flow? Absolutely. I mean, talk about wasted water. I mean, I remember in, well, after the 76, 77 drought, and then certainly in the mid-90s after the 91 drought, there was a lot of effort to do ultra-low flow toilet retrofit, and there was concern about the technology and availability, and every Lowe's and Home Depot has wonderful, relatively inexpensive, well, they are inexpensive low flow toilets. And, oh, yes. Yeah, actually under $200. Did it? Yeah, easily. And many, I'm not familiar with all of them around here, many water utilities offer rebates for that, so you don't even have to incur the whole cost. There may be a bill considered this year, it's called a retrofit on resale. So when you sell a house from an existing stock, I mean, no homes are built in California without low flow toilets. That doesn't happen anymore. But a retrofit on resale, when you sell your home, and if it's got old 6-gallon flush toilets, it has to be changed out while you're in escrow before you can close escrow. What percent of water in California is used by agriculture, and what percent is used by cities and suburbs? So it's roughly, if you followed some of the press, there's a little bit of debate on how you describe this. But of the water that we divert out of the system for human use, agriculture uses about 80%. I'd say somewhere between 76 and 80%, and then the rest is municipal and industrial use. And it's been roughly that for some time. In general, agricultural use has been going down, even though agricultural production in the state has been going up, and that's because of moving to higher efficient systems, drip systems, and that type of thing. How can we improve permeability of our urban environment? This is a big issue. I mentioned stormwater, and so there's a big effort of minimizing the amount of stormwater that runs off and turns into contamination. And so there's, as in a lot of cities across the country, an effort to make more permeable surfaces. We see this with some of the transportation projects where they actually do curb cuts so that the water, instead of just running down 10 blocks and then it actually runs off into what's called a swale. So it's been landscaped with certain kind of plants, and so it doesn't even run very far. And then there's some wonderful large projects in the region here in Sun Valley where there was a lot of flooding all the time. The first engineering approach was, well, let's build a huge pipeline and get this floodwater out to the ocean as quickly as we can, or dump it in the LA River, basically, which then runs to the ocean. Instead of that, they built a huge cistern underneath what became a park. And so they capture as much of that as they can, store it in that cistern, it infiltrates, but then they also use it to irrigate the park. And so that community really won big time in terms of having landscaping that they wouldn't have had before and access to a park. So permeability isn't just an issue for us now. This is a big national issue of doing as much as we can to increase, because we displaced all the natural recharge that used to happen, especially in the Los Angeles basin. You think of the way this used to be before we developed it, and a lot of swales and a lot of little rivers and rivulets, and now it's all concrete. And so there's a whole movement to go back to mimicking some of the original efforts. Let's see, maybe I should. Yeah, a question, could solar energy help balance energy use for desalination? And the answer is that absolutely yes. Finding renewable energy, I think, is going to be part of any sustained desal effort in California or even on the West Coast. When I mentioned the cities in Australia, many of them have kind of mothballed their desal plants. The one exception is Perth, that has a net water shortage. They have one of the largest offshore wind farms around. There's probably some larger, probably in the Netherlands or something like that, but a very large wind farm, and so they connect that directly, policy-wise, that we have this renewable energy, and that's how we're powering our desal plant.
This one is, I hope I get it right. So, recent court ruling illegalizes the tier system for water in Irvine.
Mm-hmm.
How would it affect the whole state? How do we counter this ruling?
Yeah. Yeah, that was part of the San Juan Capistrano thing that I mentioned, but this, I should add a little bit of detail to it. I mean, it has sent a chilling effect. There's a number of entities. I don't remember the city of Pasadena offhand, but I'll bet they have a tiered rate. I'd be surprised if they don't. And there's some that have done it that I think can withstand a court challenge. Some have asserted that San Juan Capistrano did a sloppy job on it. But there's also kind of a movement of, why do we have to spend so much money to do something that's so logical? And so there's increasing talk in Sacramento about running something to modify Prop 218 to make it easier to do tiered pricing, which there seems to be very broad support for. What is the viability of separate meters for indoor, outdoor water use? That's a good question. It's expensive putting new meters in. So there's a cost associated with it. There are some computer programs that actually we demonstrated some. That's one of the things. I guess I didn't explain much about the California Water Foundation, but we invested in a demo of a billing system that they analyzed the data. In this case, it was the East Bay Municipal Water District, and we funded a kind of a venture entrepreneur who developed a billing system that gives you your water use in terms of per capita. So it's not just 100 units of water, which a lot of bills read. And also then separate your indoor and outdoor. And they figured out how to analyze that, and then compares you to your neighbors, so that it could show you that your outdoor is 2 times anybody else in your neighborhood, and maybe you should consider a landscape audit type of thing. So the point of this question is a good one, of really understanding the difference between indoor and outdoor use. Now, people are talking about smart meters now, very similar to electric, that are almost time of use oriented, which again might help you break those out. Large commercial applications that have a lot of landscaping, they do have 2 meters. They usually have a landscape meter so that they can keep track of that. I'm not aware of that being done in residential application, but it might be. And you may know that in some areas of the state, we're still trying to get meters in. Fresno and Sacramento still has flat rate service areas. Now, they're on track to get that done, but it's like 2024 or something like that to do it. And it was a major fight to get meters. Yeah, excellent question. The question was meters for agriculture. And you run the entire spectrum in agriculture. There are some ag producers that know exactly how much water is coming out of that well. They know how much is going on that tree, and they monitor it essentially daily. And then there's others that still kind of the eyeball test. I'm going to open the weir where the water runs through, and I'm going to run 2 inches over it for a day and a half, and that will water up my crop just fine. And so the issue in agriculture is spreading the technology. I mean, it really is spreading how how we develop more information and how it's used more effectively. I mean, we're not there yet. Yeah. The question was, when do you think pigs can fly? No. The question was, how can citizens engage and help reach agreement on reasonable water policy? I know it's doable. I mean, I've spent my entire professional life trying to do that, and it's so challenging because in so many places, water is part of that local society, and it has this, I don't know, it's not an economic value, it's this is the way we've done things in this community for a long time, and why do you want me to change so you can build subdivisions in Los Angeles? Why do you want me to do that? Or you always run into, I'm going to let my lawn die in Sacramento so I can fill a swimming pool in, name your least favorite city, that type of thing. The answer to your question, though, I think it is possible, and it starts with being engaged in your local entity. Where I get my water from Fair Oaks Water District, and they have very senior water rights, and I'm very unhappy with them because they sent a letter to the state board. The State Water Resources Control Board sent out indication of how much you must reduce by this much. And in their case, this is 35% because of the big water users. And they sent a letter to the state board essentially saying, what you're proposing is illegal, and you cannot force us to do this. We'll conserve as much as we can. Thank you very much. And so it's some of that kind of regionalism in an odd view that has always made it very challenging to do that. But the more that people are engaged and thinking about California's future and what we want to be when we grow up, because we're still growing, and doing away with agriculture isn't reasonable because we produce very high value crops. And I mean nutritionally also, and the whole farm to fork movement. But that doesn't mean we can't say to agriculture, you've got to be more efficient. And because we want to reduce outdoor water use, that doesn't mean you have to have rocks in your front yard. It means maybe you don't have East Coast species that take massive amounts of water to stay green, and you can adapt to things that still give you a beautiful landscaping at lower. It's all about those kind of changes and that kind of future that I think can bring us together. And it's during these moments of crisis that you get people going in both directions. It's your fault that we're in this crisis, and others saying, we better pull together and figure out how we're going to deal with this. And I think that's the theme we have to sound and make this about our children. What are we leaving to our children and our grandchildren? And we have an opportunity, we have an order of magnitude more attention on water now than you would in any normal year. I mean, literally an order of magnitude, and perhaps even more. And so now's the time to get people's attention and create a vision about a healthy, thriving California that simply uses the water more efficiently. And every time we get a drop of water out of the natural system, use it over and over and over. And not just use it once and let it run into the ocean. Yes? Well, a couple of thoughts there. I mean, one, if you couldn't hear it, it was how much you can save if you focus on it. And in one case outlined, it's what we call a gray water system, where you take water from the non-sanitation uses in your home and then use that for landscaping. And one scary thing about that, when I left this morning, my wife said she was going to talk to somebody about doing that for us. So I'm afraid I'm going to go home and there's going to be a big hole in the wall because she likes to do things herself. So I'm a little worried about that. But that's another one, that because of the drought, there's incredible attention on the amount of water that runs through your home that you could be doing something with and reusing it. And the other one that's similar to that is a better job of rain barrels or other catchments to get the water when it does rain, and then hold that in gray water systems. And so how do you get that word out? And ideally, again, in a drought, you have your major water providers providing incentives or technical support to do that for individuals. We need to be doing that with a new construction that happens. That should be just the way new homes come, dual plumbed, so that you can deal with those kinds of issues. Some cities, I'm not familiar down here, I know San Francisco has an ordinance. If you're building a new commercial building, you capture every piece of water that falls on your piece of land, and you use it, and you can't let it run off. And I think they even have it for gray water recycling within the building to do that. And when it comes to landscaping, there are some significant turf purchase programs going on. Metropolitan Water District, the wholesaler for this region, is putting money up, and in many cases then the local retail utility is adding to it. So I think in LA it's up to like $350 or $375 a square foot for your turf that you will get for taking it out. So much incentive that there are now entrepreneurs. I think there's one called Turf Terminator that goes door to door and said, are you aware that this is available, and if you would like us to, we'll do the work for you. So it's even created economic opportunity. So it's that type of thing. We can be very creative when we focus on things like that. It's just most of the time we don't think about water. Only when the well runs dry. Isn't that what Benjamin Franklin said?
Any other questions? Yeah.
That's probably not a big impact, but I mean, there's several issues. I mean, we find some talking about water running to the ocean is wasting water, and that's pretty much ignoring all the environmental issues, especially in Northern California, where that water that goes to the ocean is essential for the salmon run. I mean, if you're not connected to the ocean, down here it's a little different, where much of the LA River over the years has become, a storm drain, although there's incredible efforts to start restoring the LA River, and a lot of money going into that. So, I think that can once again be a vital piece of the environment in Southern California. I wouldn't worry about the salinity issue too much, but because so much comes from the rain. The hydrologic cycle delivers massive amounts of water back into the system. You really can't destroy water. You can make it really dirty, but you can't destroy it. It's going to turn up somewhere. So I probably need to wrap up. And,
Just maybe one more.
Sure. Does using a very full dishwasher as opposed to hand washing actually conserve water? I don't know. That's a good question. I would have to presume that if you take the stack of dishes that would fill a dishwasher and then you were going to wash them by hand, that the dishwasher would save. That would certainly be my guess. Yeah. But yeah, we just use paper plates and then compost them. But you folks have had great questions that have made me think, and I really appreciate that. So it's been a lot of fun being here today. Thank you.